The garden was my sanctuary, my escape from the harsh realities that plagued our family. With each seedling I nurtured, I found solace in the idea that something beautiful could still bloom amidst the chaos. "Why are you always in the garden, Amelie? Trying to dig up your real dad?" Leah's words cut through the tranquility like a knife, her sneering voice dripping with venom. I clenched my fists, the soil clinging to my fingers like a reassuring embrace. "Shut up, Leah. At least I know where I belong." Her laughter echoed through the garden, mocking my attempt at finding peace. Leah had always been a thorn in my side, her mere presence a constant reminder of the fractures within our family. As we stood in the lush garden of our new home, the tension between us was palpable. My mother had hoped this move would bring us closer, but Leah's vindictive nature seemed to only worsen with each passing day. I turned my attention back to the delicate seedlings, carefully tending to them as Leah's footsteps faded into the distance. But her malice lingered like a dark cloud looming over my sanctuary. Days later, I discovered the cruel reality of her contempt. My precious plants, once vibrant and full of promise, lay wilted and trampled. Leah's handiwork, no doubt, a twisted act of sabotage against the one thing that brought me joy. When my mother confronted us, Leah's crocodile tears flowed freely, her lies as smooth as silk. And as always, I bore the brunt of the punishment, forced to clean up the mess while Leah basked in her triumph. As I knelt in the garden, replanting the seedlings with trembling hands, a newfound determination took root within me. Leah might think she had won this battle, but the war had just begun. The garden incident was merely the beginning of Leah's relentless campaign to make my life miserable. As we entered high school, our paths diverged even further, with me focusing on academics while Leah gained a reputation for trouble. It was during our junior year that tensions reached a boiling point. Mrs. Wilkins, our strict English teacher, had left a stack of exam papers unattended on her desk. The next day, the entire class was in an uproar. Someone had stolen the exams, and the culprit was nowhere to be found. As I walked down the hallway, whispers and accusing glances followed me like a dark cloud. Leah, ever the opportunist, seized the moment to strike. Well, if it isn't little Miss Perfect," she sneered, her cronies snickering behind her. "Couldn't resist the temptation, could you?" I opened my mouth to protest, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Save it, Amelie. We all know you're the one who took the exams. You've always been a cheater, just like your deadbeat dad." Her words stung like 1,000 needles, and I felt the weight of everyone's eyes upon me. Before I could defend myself, Mrs. Wilkins appeared, her face contorted with fury. "Miss Harper, come with me. We have a lot to discuss." Leah's smug grin burned into my memory as I was dragged away, my protests falling on deaf ears. No matter how much I pleaded my innocence, the evidence was damning. The stolen exams had been found in my locker, no doubt planted there by Leah's scheming hands. The punishment was swift and severe. Suspension, academic probation, and a permanent mark on my record. As I sat alone in the principal's office, the weight of Leah's betrayal crushed me like a ton of bricks. At home, the situation was no better. My mother, always the peacekeeper, tried to remain neutral, but my stepfather's loyalty to Leah was unwavering. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," my mother said, her voice wavering with uncertainty. "Don't be naive, Marie," my stepfather scoffed. "Amelie has always been jealous of Leah's popularity. This was bound to happen eventually." As they argued, Leah lounged on the couch, her eyes gleaming with triumph. She caught my gaze and mouthed the words that would forever haunt me. "Enjoy being a nobody, Amelie. You deserve it." In that moment, a fire ignited within me, a burning desire to prove her wrong, to show her that I was more than just a shadow in her wake. "I'll show you what it means to truly matter," I whispered, my hands balled into fists. Leah's laughter echoed through the room, but I didn't care. From that day forward, I vowed to rise above her petty games and carve my own path, no matter what obstacles she threw my way. Graduation couldn't come soon enough. As I walked across that stage, diploma in hand, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I was finally free from the toxic environment that had plagued me for years, free from Leah's constant torment and manipulation. With a sense of determination, I packed my bags and set out for a new city, ready to start a fresh chapter. No more living in the shadows, no more letting Leah dictate my worth. This was my chance to truly bloom. I found a small apartment in the heart of the city, its walls adorned with vibrant murals and the streets lined with lush greenery. It was here that my passion for urban gardening took root, a passion that had been ignited by those precious moments in the garden, away from Leah's poisonous influence. I spent countless hours researching and planning, determined to bring a little bit of nature's beauty to the concrete jungle. My vision? An urban oasis, a sanctuary where people could escape the hustle and bustle and connect with the earth. It wasn't long before my dream began to take shape. With the help of a few like-minded individuals, we transformed an abandoned lot into a verdant paradise, filled with lush vegetation and winding pathways. As the garden flourished, so did I. Each seedling I planted, each flower that bloomed, was a testament to my resilience, a reminder that I could create something beautiful out of even the most barren of landscapes. It was during one of my daily visits to the garden that I met Lucas, a kind-hearted neighbor who shared my passion for green spaces. From the moment we locked eyes, there was an instant connection, a spark that ignited something within me. "This place is incredible," he said, his eyes wide with wonder as he took in the vibrant colors and lush foliage. "You've done an amazing job." I couldn't help but blush at his praise, feeling a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the summer sun. "It's a work in progress," I replied, trying to play it cool. "But I have big plans for this place." From that day on, Lucas became a constant presence in my life, offering a helping hand and a listening ear whenever I needed it. With his support, my urban garden continued to thrive, drawing attention from community leaders and local organizations. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, valued for my hard work and dedication, rather than judged by the shadows of my past. As I stood amidst the lush greenery, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. This was my fresh start, my chance to bloom and grow without the weight of Leah's toxic presence holding me back. Little did I know, the shadows of my past were about to come crashing back into my life, threatening to uproot everything I had worked so hard to build. The urban garden was thriving, a true oasis in the heart of the city. With each passing day, more and more people flocked to our little slice of nature, eager to escape the concrete jungle and bask in the beauty of the lush greenery. It was during one of our community events that I first noticed the well-dressed figures mingling among the crowd, their eyes appraising the garden with a mixture of admiration and calculation. Little did I know, these were the first signs of trouble brewing on the horizon. As the garden's popularity grew, so did the attention from powerful community figures and local developers. It seemed everyone wanted a piece of our little paradise, each with their own agenda and ulterior motives. It was during this time that Leah resurfaced, like a shadow from my past come to haunt me once again. "Emily, is that really you?" Her voice was sickly sweet, dripping with false sincerity. I turned, and there she was, looking almost unrecognizable with her perfectly coiffed hair and designer outfit. But those eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were unmistakable. "Leah," I said, my voice guarded, "what are you doing here?" "Can't a sister come and support her family?" she replied, her lips curling into a saccharine smile. "I've heard so much about your little garden project, and I have to say, I'm impressed." I couldn't help but scoff at her words, memories of her past cruelties flooding back to me. "Cut the act, Leah. We both know you're not here out of the goodness of your heart." Her mask slipped for a moment, flicker of annoyance crossing her features before she regained her composure. "You're right, I'm not here just to admire the scenery," she admitted, taking a step closer. "I want in." I laughed in her face, the absurdity of her request too much to bear. "You help me? After everything you've done?" "I've changed, Emily," she insisted, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "I'm sorry for everything, Em. Let's put the past behind us and make something beautiful together." Against my better judgment, a part of me wanted to believe her. Perhaps she had truly turned over a new leaf, leaving her toxic ways behind. Or perhaps this was just another one of her twisted games, a new way to worm her way into my life and tear me down from the inside. But then I thought of Lucas, of the unwavering support he had shown me, and I knew I couldn't risk it all on Leah's empty promises. "Fine," I said, steeling my resolve. "But I'll be watching you every step of the way. One wrong move, and you're out. Leah's face lit up with a triumphant grin, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a grave mistake. You won't regret this, Em, she said, her voice dripping with false sincerity. Together, we're going to make this garden the envy of the city. As she sauntered away, I couldn't help but wonder if I had just opened the door for Leah to wreak havoc on my life once again. But this time, I vowed I wouldn't be caught off guard. This time, I would be ready for whatever she had planned. With the garden in full bloom, it was time to showcase our hard work to the entire community. I had been planning a grand harvest festival, a celebration of nature's bounty and the urban oasis we had created together. Leah, true to her word, had been helping with the preparations, her enthusiasm almost convincing. Almost. This is going to be amazing, Em, she gushed, her perfectly manicured nails gesturing at the decorations we had spent hours assembling. The whole city is going to be talking about this festival for years to come. I forced a smile, trying my best to push aside the nagging doubts that plagued me whenever she was around. Let's just hope everything goes according to plan, I replied, my eyes scanning the garden for any sign of trouble. Leah must have noticed my skepticism, because she immediately moved closer, her hand resting on my arm in a gesture of false reassurance. Hey, don't worry so much, she said, her voice dripping with saccharine sweetness. I've got your back, remember? We're in this together. I wanted to believe her, to trust that she had truly changed her ways. But the memories of her past betrayals were like a weight around my neck, holding me back from fully letting my guard down. The days leading up to the festival were a whirlwind of activity, with volunteers and vendors flooding the garden to set up their displays and booths. It was during one of these frantic mornings that disaster struck. I arrived at the garden to find a scene of utter chaos. Rare plants had been uprooted, their delicate blooms crushed and scattered across the ground. Equipment had been smashed and valuables were missing from the storage shed. My heart sank as I surveyed the wreckage, the months of hard work and preparation undone in a single night. What happened here? I whispered, my voice barely audible over the din of concerned volunteers. It was then that Leah appeared, her face a mask of concern and sympathy. Emily, I'm so sorry, she said, her arms encircling me in a tight embrace. I just got here myself and saw the mess. Someone must have broken in during the night. I pulled away, my eyes searching her face for any sign of deception, but her expression was flawless, her eyes wide and innocent. This is a disaster, I said, running a hand through my disheveled hair. The festival is in 2 days. How are we going to recover from this? Leah's grip on my arm tightened, her perfectly painted lips curling into a reassuring smile. Don't worry, Em. I'll help you rebuild everything, I promise. As she spoke those words, a flicker of doubt wormed its way into my mind. Was this just another one of Leah's twisted games, a way to gain my trust only to snatch it away at the last moment? I studied her face, searching for any hint of deception, any clue that her supposed concern was nothing more than a carefully crafted lie. But there was nothing, just the same earnest expression she had worn since her return. Against my better judgment, I found myself nodding, accepting her offer of help. After all, what choice did I have? The festival was quickly approaching, and I needed all the support I could get. Little did I know, Leah's involvement was about to unleash a chain of events that would shake the very foundation of everything I had built, exposing the true depths of her duplicity and leaving me to question everything I thought I knew. Despite Leah's reassurances and promises to help rebuild, a nagging suspicion lingered in the back of my mind. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her sudden involvement than met the eye. It was then that Lucas approached me with a proposition, a way to uncover the truth once and for all. Emily, I know you're worried about Leah's motives, he said, his voice low and serious. And to be honest, I am too. I nodded, relieved that someone else shared my concerns. So what do you suggest we do? I asked, my heart racing at the prospect of finally exposing Leah's true intentions. Lucas leaned in closer, his eyes darting around to ensure we weren't overheard. We plan a few hidden cameras and recording devices around the garden, he whispered. That way, we can keep an eye on her every move and catch her in the act if she's up to something. The idea made me uneasy at first. spying on my own sister felt wrong, like a betrayal of the fragile trust we had begun to rebuild. But then I remembered all the times she had betrayed me, all the pain and anguish she had caused, and my resolve hardened. "Let's do it," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. Over the next few days, Lucas and I discreetly set up hidden cameras and microphones throughout the garden, tucking them away in strategic locations where they would be sure to capture Leah's every move. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary, just Leah diligently working alongside the volunteers, her face a mask of dedication and hard work. But then, one fateful night, the cameras caught something that shattered my world. It was well after dark, and the garden was deserted, save for a solitary figure, moving through the shadows. As the grainy footage played out, my heart sank. It was Leah, and she wasn't alone. The camera zoomed in, capturing her hushed conversation with a sharply dressed woman I didn't recognize. "Everything is going according to plan," Leah said, her voice a low hiss. "Emily suspects nothing." The woman nodded, her perfectly coiffed hair glinting in the moonlight. "Excellent," she replied, her tone all business. "Once the garden is out of the way, we can proceed with the mall development project as planned." My blood ran cold as the pieces fell into place. Leah had been working with this woman, a developer, no doubt, to sabotage the garden and clear the way for commercial development. "It's just business," Leah said with a shrug. "She'll never see it coming." Rage and betrayal coursed through my veins as I watched the footage, the true depths of Leah's duplicity finally laid bare. All this time, she had been playing me for a fool, worming her way into my life only to tear it all down for her own gain. As the two women parted ways, their sinister laughter echoing through the empty garden, I made a vow. Leah would pay for her betrayal, and this time, there would be no more second chances. The next morning, I called an emergency community board meeting, my hands trembling with fury as I gathered the evidence. Leah's lies and manipulation would be exposed for all to see, and she would finally face the consequences of her actions. As the board members filed in, their faces etched with concern, I took a deep breath and steeled my resolve. It was time to bring Leah's reign of terror to an end, once and for all. With the damning footage in hand, Lucas and I devised a plan to finally expose Leah's treachery once and for all. We knew she wouldn't go down without a fight, so we had to be strategic, carefully laying the groundwork to ensure her lies unraveled before the entire community. The first step was to secure the critical public vote that would determine the future of the urban garden. Leah, ever the manipulator, had been working tirelessly to sway the community in her favor, spreading rumors and half-truths about my supposed mismanagement of the project. "Emily is in over her head," she would whisper to anyone who would listen. "This garden is a sinking ship, and it's time to cut our losses before it drags the entire neighborhood down with it." Her words were like poison, seeping into the minds of those who had once been our staunchest supporters. I could feel the tide turning, the community's faith in me and the garden wavering with each passing day. But Lucas and I had a trump card: the truth. We just needed to find the right moment to play it. That moment came at a crucial community meeting, where the final vote on the garden's future was to take place. Leah was there, of course, her perfectly coiffed hair and designer outfit a stark contrast to the humble surroundings of the community center. As the meeting commenced, she wasted no time in launching her attack, her silver tongue weaving a web of lies and half-truths. "Friends, neighbors, I come to you today with a heavy heart," she began, her voice dripping with false concern. "It pains me to say this, but the urban garden project has become a liability, a drain on our community's resources, and a threat to our safety." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and I could see doubt creeping into the faces of those who had once been our most ardent supporters. "Emily Harper has proven herself incapable of managing this endeavor," Leah continued, her eyes locking with mine for a brief moment. "It's time we cut our losses and explore more profitable options for the land." As she spoke those words, I felt a familiar fire ignite within me, a burning desire to expose her lies and reclaim the truth. It was then that Lucas caught my eye and gave a subtle nod, the signal we had been waiting for. Without a word, I stood and made my way to the front of the room, the damning footage already queued up on the projector screen behind me. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, my voice steady and resolute. Before we proceed with this vote, there's something you all need to see. With a click of the remote, the grainy footage sprang to life, Leah's hushed conversation with the developer playing out for all to witness. Gasps and murmurs filled the room as the truth was laid bare. Leah's true motives, her betrayal, her willingness to sell out the entire community for her own personal gain. As the footage ended, I turned to face the stunned crowd, my eyes finding Leah's in the front row. Her mask had slipped, her perfectly composed facade crumbling as the weight of her lies crashed down upon her. "This is what you've been dealing with," I said, my voice ringing out clear and strong. "A liar, a manipulator, someone willing to sacrifice everything we've built for her own selfish desires." Leah leapt to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "How dare you?" she spat, her eyes wild and unhinged. "You think you can take me down with some doctored footage? You're delusional, Emily." But it was too late. The seed of doubt had been planted, and as the crowd turned on her, their voices rising in a chorus of outrage and condemnation, Leah's true nature was laid bare for all to see. In that moment, I knew we had won. Leah's reign of terror was over, her web of lies unraveled before the very community she had sought to deceive. As she stormed out of the room, her head bowed in shame and defeat, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication, a weight lifted from my shoulders. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. As Lucas and I embraced, surrounded by the cheers and well wishes of our supporters, I knew that the road ahead would be long and arduous, but with the truth on our side and the community rallied behind us, I knew that nothing could stop us from realizing our dream of a verdant urban oasis. With Leah's lies exposed and her betrayal laid bare, a weight lifted from my shoulders. The community had rallied behind me, their faith in the urban garden project renewed and stronger than ever. It was time to move forward, to leave the shadows of the past behind and embrace the bright future that lay ahead. In the weeks and months that followed, the garden flourished under our care, each new bloom a testament to our resilience and determination. The once barren lot had been transformed into a verdant oasis, a sanctuary where people could escape the hustle and bustle of the city and reconnect with nature. As I walked the winding paths, my hand intertwined with Lucas's, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. This was our creation, our legacy, a living, breathing reminder that even in the most unlikely of places, beauty could take root and thrive. The community embraced the garden with open arms, organizing events and gatherings that brought people together in celebration of our shared haven. Children ran through the lush greenery, their laughter filling the air, while elders sat on benches, basking in the tranquility of their surroundings. It was during one such event, a grand festival celebrating the garden's first anniversary, that I was approached by a familiar face, Tommy Whitman, a prominent member of the community board. "Emily, my dear," he said, his weathered face splitting into a warm smile. "Look at what you've accomplished here. It's truly remarkable." I felt a blush creep into my cheeks at his praise, still unaccustomed to the outpouring of support and admiration that had become a regular occurrence. "It's been a long road," I admitted, my gaze sweeping over the vibrant blooms and lush foliage. "But every step was worth it to create something like this." Tommy nodded, his eyes twinkling with pride. "You know, when you first pitched this idea, I'll admit, I had my doubts," he confessed. "But you've proven time and time again that your vision and dedication are second to none." He reached out, clasping my hand in his own calloused grip. "The community owes you a debt of gratitude, Emily. You've given us something truly special, a sanctuary in the heart of the city." As he spoke those words, I felt a swell of emotion rise within me, a mix of gratitude and relief that my hard work had finally been recognized and appreciated. The festivities continued long into the night, a celebration of not just the garden's success, but of the resilience and perseverance that had brought us to this moment. As I mingled among the crowd, exchanging hugs and well wishes, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure, a weight lifted from my shoulders. It was then that Lucas approached me, his eyes shining with pride and admiration. "You did it, Amelie," he said, pulling me into a tight embrace. "You made your dream a reality." I nodded, my gaze drifting to a small corner of the garden where a single sapling stood tall and proud, its delicate leaves unfurling in the gentle breeze. "Not quite," I said, a warm smile spreading across my face. "There's one more thing left to do." With Lucas by my side, I made my way to the sapling, a remnant of my childhood garden that had survived the trials and tribulations of my past. As I knelt before it, my fingers caressing the tender bark, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a closure that had been years in the making. "Ready to start planting again, Lucas?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He squeezed my hand, his warmth and support enveloping me like a comforting embrace. "With you, Emily, we can make anything grow." And in that moment, as I placed the sapling in the rich soil of our urban oasis, I knew that the shadows of my past had finally been banished, replaced by the promise of a future as vibrant and full of life as the garden that surrounded us. The news hit me like a sledgehammer to the gut. My husband, Rowan, had just received a call that his estranged uncle, the wealthy business magnate Jonathan Winthrop, had passed away. "Your uncle named you as one of the primary beneficiaries in his will," the lawyer on the other end announced. Rowan's eyes widened in disbelief. "My uncle? But we haven't spoken in over a decade. Are you certain?" "Quite certain, Mr. Blackwood. You and your wife are requested to attend the reading of the will tomorrow." As the call ended, Rowan turned to me, his expression a mix of shock and confusion. "Alara, this could be our chance to turn things around. Uncle Jonathan's fortune could save our struggling business." I forced a smile, trying to mirror his cautious optimism, but a knot of unease twisted in my stomach. Nothing in life came without a price, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this unexpected windfall would demand a heavy toll. The next day, we found ourselves in the opulent study of Jonathan Winthrop's sprawling mansion, surrounded by his legal team and other potential beneficiaries. As the lawyer started reading the will, a hush fell over the room. "To my estranged nephew, Rowan Blackwood, and his wife, Alara, I bequeath my entire estate, including this property and all assets, on one condition." My heart raced as the lawyer paused for dramatic effect. Rowan squeezed my hand, his palm clammy. "They must take up permanent residence in this mansion for a period of no less than 1 year." A collective gasp filled the room, but one voice rose above the others, dripping with venom. "This is an outrage," Rowan's mother, Margot, spat. "That inheritance is rightfully mine. I'm Jonathan's only living relative." Her eyes locked onto me, filled with undisguised hatred. "This is that little gold digger's doing, I'm sure of it." Rowan stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "Mother, you have no right. Don't you dare take her side, you ungrateful whelp," Margot hissed, her words slicing like knives. The lawyer cleared his throat, attempting to restore order. "The terms are clear, Mrs. Winthrop. If Mr. and Mrs. Blackwood fail to meet the residence requirement, the entire estate will be distributed among various charities." Margot's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Mark my words, you'll regret this. That mansion and everything in it belong to me by rights. I'll make your life a living hell until you surrender what's mine." As her gaze bored into me, a chill ran down my spine. I knew, in that moment, our lives had taken an irrevocable turn, and the battle lines had been drawn. A week later, we stood before the looming gates of Winthrop Manor, our new home, or gilded cage as it felt. The ancient stone edifice seemed to stare down at us, its Gothic spires like accusing fingers against the slate-gray sky. "Are you sure about this?" I asked Rowan, my grip tightening on his hand. He offered a grim smile. "We don't have a choice if we want a future. Just promise me you'll be careful around Mother." As if on cue, the gates creaked open, and Margot emerged from the shadows like a specter, her expression a rictus of disdain. "So the prodigal son returns," she sneered, "and he brings his little bride into my home." I fought the urge to recoil as her eyes raked over me with undisguised loathing. "This is Uncle Jonathan's home now, Mother," Rowan said, his voice strained. "We're here to honor his wishes." "His wishes?" Margot barked a harsh laugh. "That senile old fool was manipulated in his final days, no thanks to your scheming wife, I'm sure." Before I could respond, she stepped closer, her face inches from mine. "Listen closely, you conniving little tramp. This is my domain, and I'll make your life a waking nightmare until you slink back to whatever hovel you crawled out of." Rowan pulled me back, shielding me with his body. "That's enough, Mother. You've gone too far." Margot's lips curled into a cruel smile. We'll see about that. As she turned and stormed back towards the manor, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The games had begun. Over the following weeks, Margot's campaign of subtle torment intensified. Priceless heirlooms went missing, only to reappear in bizarre locations. Strange noises echoed through the halls at night, keeping me awake. And the servants treated me with thinly veiled contempt, no doubt following Margot's lead. "She's just trying to rattle you," Rowan insisted. But I could see the doubt creeping into his eyes. One night, as I descended the grand staircase, I felt a violent shove from behind. I tumbled down the steps, searing pain lancing through my body as I crashed to the marble floor. When I finally regained my senses, Margot was standing over me, a sickening grin plastered across her face. "Clumsy girl," she purred. "You should be more careful." As she turned and walked away, I felt a cold certainty settle in my gut. This was no longer a game to her. Margot was willing to go to any lengths to drive me out, even if it meant destroying me in the process. After the accident on the stairs, I knew I couldn't trust anyone in that house. Except perhaps Rowan, but even his loyalty was becoming strained by his mother's vicious campaign against me. I took to wandering the manor's shadowy corridors at night when everyone else was asleep, searching for any clue that could expose Margot's true motives. On one such foray, I discovered a hidden door behind an antique bookcase, leading to a dust-covered study that seemed untouched for decades. Inside, I found a trove of old letters and documents, including correspondence between Margot and Jonathan in their younger years. What I read made my blood run cold. It appeared Margot had been stealing from the family fortune for years through elaborate financial schemes, only to be cut off by Jonathan when he uncovered her deceit. As I dug deeper, I also uncovered evidence that Margot had once been involved with a shady business partner of Jonathan's, a man who later disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Had Margot gone so far as to have him killed to cover her tracks? Armed with this damning information, I knew I had to confront her, once and for all. But when I tried to show the evidence to Rowan, he refused to believe his beloved mother was capable of such depravity. "These letters prove nothing," he snapped, pushing the documents away. "Mother has been nothing but generous and loving her entire life. I think you're allowing your imagination to run wild." "Don't be a fool, Rowan," I cried, my frustration boiling over. "Can't you see she's manipulating you, just like she's been doing your entire life?" His jaw tightened, and I realized I'd struck a nerve. "Get out. I need some time alone to think about all of this." As I left him brooding in the study, a pit of dread opened in my stomach. Margot's web of lies was so intricately woven, so deeply rooted in Rowan's psyche, that I feared nothing short of a miracle could make him see the truth. In the days that followed, strange occurrences began plaguing me again. More missing valuables, eerie scratching sounds from behind the walls, and an increasing sense of being watched. I knew Margot was behind it all, but I could never catch her in the act. Then, one evening, the servants began whispering about a scandalous story that had surfaced in the local papers, depicting me as a shameless gold digger who had ensnared Rowan through nefarious means. The vicious lies left me reeling, and I knew Margot's hand was behind this public defamation. When I confronted Rowan about it, he seemed conflicted, torn between his loyalty to me and his ingrained devotion to his mother. "Perhaps it would be best if you left for a while," he said, unable to meet my eyes, "at least until this blows over." As I stared at the man I loved, I realized our relationship was hanging by a thread, fraying under the relentless onslaught of Margot's cruelty. If I didn't act soon, I would lose everything: my home, my husband, and any chance at the life we'd dreamed of. The battle lines had been drawn, and I would have to fight with every weapon at my disposal if I hoped to survive the war Margot had declared. No matter the cost, I wouldn't go down without a fight. In the aftermath of the vicious newspaper story, the atmosphere at Winthrop Manor became suffocating. Rowan grew increasingly distant, torn between his loyalty to me and his lifelong conditioning by his manipulative mother. Meanwhile, Margot's underhanded tactics escalated in boldness and cruelty. It all came to a head one chilly autumn night. I had retired early to the bedroom Rowan and I shared, exhausted from another day of walking on eggshells in that accursed house. As I prepared for bed, a faint scratching sound came from the adjoining dressing room. like fingernails on wood. My heart pounding, I crept toward the noise, pushing open the dressing room door. That's when I saw it. A blazing trail of liquid snaking along the floor towards the piles of cast-off clothing. The unmistakable scent of kerosene filled my nostrils, seconds before the first lick of flame consumed the fabric. I stumbled back, choking on thick black smoke as the fire spread with terrifying speed. By the time I made it back into the bedroom, flames licked hungrily at the draperies and seared my lungs. I clawed desperately at the bedroom door, but some force held it firmly in place from the other side. "Help! Rowan! Please, someone help me!" I screamed, panic clawing at my throat as the room became an inferno around me. Then, over the roar of the blaze, I heard it, Margot's shrill laughter cutting through the chaos. That twisted cackle would haunt my nightmares for the rest of my days. Just as the searing pain and smoke threatened to overwhelm me, the bedroom door exploded inward with a thunderous crack. Rowan burst in, soot streaking his panic-stricken face, and pulled me bodily from the conflagration raging within. I don't remember much after that, only fragments of being rushed to the hospital, bandages binding my scorched skin, and the vacant look in Rowan's eyes as he watched over me in silence. When I finally regained my senses days later, Rowan sat slumped by my bedside, his expression hardening as I recounted the night's events. "She tried to kill you," he muttered in a hollow tone, the truth he had been so desperate to deny finally settling in his bones. "My own mother." I took his hand, ignoring the sting of my blistered skin, and made him meet my gaze. "She has to be stopped, Rowan, before this goes any further." His eyes smoldered with rage and anguish, I know. But even then, as he said the words, I could see the fractures splintering his loyalty, the product of a lifetime's manipulation threatening to reassert itself. Margot's twisted lies had sunk their hooks in deep, and I feared they might never fully release their grip on the man I loved. Rowan pressed his forehead to my hand, his next words barely more than a pained whisper. "I want to believe you, Alara, more than anything, but without proof, without knowing the full truth of what she's done." He trailed off, and in that moment, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life, as if I were drifting helplessly at sea with no anchor to hold me in place. It was then that I knew I would have to take matters into my own hands if I had any hope of surviving Margot's vendetta and salvaging what little remained of my crumbling life. Whatever the cost, I had to find a way to expose that vile woman's sins before they destroyed me completely. After the harrowing ordeal of the fire, I knew I couldn't remain a passive victim any longer. If I didn't take decisive action, Margot's malicious games would consume me completely. Rowan's loyalty was hanging by a frayed thread, and it was clear I couldn't rely on him to protect me from his mother's ruthless machinations. In the depths of that long, agonizing night following the inferno, a newfound resolve took root within me. I would gather whatever allies and evidence I could to finally expose Margot for the vicious, conniving snake she truly was, even if it meant facing her darkness head-on. My first step was contacting the local authorities and providing them with the damning letters and documents I'd uncovered, detailing Margot's financial crimes and the mysterious disappearance of Jonathan's former business partner. While the police seemed skeptical at first, the mounting pile of evidence against her could not be easily dismissed. Next, I reached out to an unlikely source, Francine, one of the manor's longest-serving maids who had endured Margot's cruel treatment for decades. Years of pent-up resentment bubbled to the surface as I revealed what I knew of Margot's misdeeds. "That wretched harpy has had her talons in me since I were a young girl," Francine hissed, her voice thick with hatred. "Blackmail, threats, you name it. She's a right evil one, that's for certainty." With Francine's help, I began uncovering even more of Margot's sordid secrets, illicit affairs, underhanded business dealings, and long-buried scandals that she'd worked tirelessly to conceal. It became increasingly clear that her entire life was a meticulously constructed web of lies and deceit. However, the final piece of the puzzle remained maddeningly elusive, the key to unraveling her twisted scheme against me and exposing her murderous intentions once and for all. That crucial lead finally came from an unexpected source: Margot's own estranged younger sister, Emma, who had been ostracized from the family years ago. I received an anonymous letter from her, detailing a particularly vicious confrontation that had driven her from Winthrop Manor in disgrace. "Margot has always been rotten to the core," Emma wrote in a shaky hand. "Petty, vindictive, utterly consumed by greed and status. But you must know the truth about what really happened the night our father died. The real reason she turned on me so viciously." My hands trembled as I read on, the final horrifying revelation unfolding like a serpent unfurling its coils. Emma claimed that on the night of their father's fatal heart attack, she had discovered Margot rifling through his safe and pocketing wads of cash and valuable documents. When Emma threatened to expose her sister's despicable actions, Margot had snapped, unleashing a torrent of vile accusations and threats that left Emma fearing for her very life. In that moment, I knew I held the linchpin, the damning evidence that could finally topple Margot's house of cards and reveal the true depravity lurking behind her meticulously crafted facade. Armed with Emma's testimony and the weight of everything I'd uncovered, I resolved to bring the full truth to light in a final, climactic confrontation. No more games, no more veiled threats or skirting the periphery of Margot's secrets. It was time to wield the power of her own sins as a weapon and cut her down to size once and for all. As I steeled myself for the impending battle, I could almost feel the gathering storm rumbling in the distance, heavy with the promise of reckoning. Margot's reign of terror and deception was nearing its end, by her own hand or by mine. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than I expected. I had summoned the estate's executors, the police, and a few trusted allies to bear witness as I finally stripped away Margot's veil of lies and deception. We gathered in the manor's grand hall, the vaulted ceiling seeming to press down with the weight of the impending confrontation. Rowan stood apart from the others, his expression haunted, as he steeled himself for the ugliness to come. Margot swept in fashionably late, as was her style, her haughty gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd with a mix of disdain and bemusement. "Well, well, to what do I owe this merry little gathering?" She arched an inquisitive eyebrow at me. "Don't tell me my dear daughter-in-law is hatching another pathetic scheme for attention?" "Cut the act, Margot," I spat, my anger simmering just beneath the surface. "Your game is up. We know everything." For a split second, a flicker of uncertainty danced across her face before the mask reasserted itself. "I haven't the faintest idea what you're raving about, you delusional little—" "Save your venom," I snarled, retrieving a thick manila envelope with a trembling hand. "We have all the proof we need of your lies, your crimes, your murderous intentions." As I began laying out the damning trail of evidence, the letters, the financial records, Emma's testimony, Margot's expression shifted from derision to outright fury. Her eyes bulged with unbridled rage as each new revelation compounded the last. "That sniveling, traitorous whore," she screeched when I revealed Emma's words. "How dare she slander me with these absurd fairy tales?" Rowan took an involuntary step backward, as if her outburst had struck him bodily. It was the first crack in his staunch denial, the first glimmer of realization seeping through. "These are nothing but malicious fabrications," Margot raged on, turning her vitriol towards the executors and police. "I demand you remove these despicable liars from my home at once." But they stood firm, unmoved by her bluster as the weight of the evidence became insurmountable. With an animalistic shriek of pure fury, Margot turned on me, her immaculately manicured fingernails hooked like talons. "You ungrateful, conniving little snake," she howled, spittle flying from her lips. "This is all you're doing, isn't it? You could never be content with an ounce of my generosity. Well, I'll see you utterly destitute and ruined for this, I swear on my life." In that moment she seemed to swell to an even more grotesque, inhuman form, a twisted, wrath-filled harpy clawing desperately at the unraveling threads of her meticulously crafted lies. Rowan moved to intervene, to shield me from his mother's incandescent rage, but I held up a hand to stop him. I would face her unbridled fury and let it consume itself to bitter ashes. "It's over, Margot," I said, startled by the calm resolution in my own voice. "No more lies, no more manipulations. Your house of cards has collapsed around you, and this time there's no escaping the consequences of your actions." For a long, breathless moment, she seemed on the verge of unleashing another torrent of rage and denial. But then something shifted in her eyes. The fight bled out of her. letting the mask slip just a bit to reveal the hollowed, broken thing that lurked beneath. As the police moved to take her into custody, Margot didn't resist. She simply sagged in on herself like a deflating husk and allowed herself to be led away in contemptuous silence. Only then did the floodgates open for Rowan. He crumpled to the floor in racking sobs, all the years of anguish and torment finally spilling forth. As I gathered him in my arms, I knew both healing and hardship still lay ahead. Though Margot's twisted games had been exposed, shattered shards of her poisoned legacy still remained, fractures that would take years to mend if they ever fully could. But in that moment, allowing the cathartic release to wash over us both, I knew we would persevere. Margot's tyranny had been broken, and from the ashes of her ruination, perhaps some semblance of hard-won peace could finally take root. In the aftermath of Margot's explosive unraveling, the consequences of her depravity unfurled like a wildfire, consuming everything in its path. The evidence we had gathered proved irrefutable. Records of embezzlement, blackmail, corporate sabotage, and even mounting circumstantial ties to at least one suspicious disappearance. As the full extent of her sins came to light through a highly publicized legal prosecution, the reactions from her once vaunted social circles ranged from shock and revulsion to a perverse sort of schadenfreude. Who would have thought prim-proper Margot Winthrop was really such a degenerate monster? I overheard one well-coiffed matron murmur to her companion outside the courthouse. She always seemed so genteel and refined. Just goes to show you never really know someone, do you? For her part, Margot embraced her infamy with a sort of deranged defiance, lashing out with unrestrained vitriol at every turn. It was as if, now that her facade had been irreparably shattered, she delighted in flaunting the full breadth of her depravity. "You imbeciles have no inkling of what I've sacrificed to maintain our family's status and legacy," she screeched during one courtroom tirade. "You're fortunate I didn't have the lot of you disposed of the same way as that sniveling worm Jonathan's partner." A collective gasp went up from the gallery, feeding Margot's twisted delight like a starving flame. She turned her blazing eyes towards Rowan and me, and I felt an involuntary shudder at the naked loathing burning in their depths. "Look at them, cowering like the gutless fools they are. You're the reason our noble lineage lies in ashes, the both of you. Weak-willed, pathetic." Her venomous diatribe was finally cut off by the stern banging of the judge's gavel. But even as the bailiffs muscled her away, Margot directed one last look of pure, unbridled hatred in our direction. A silent promise that this war was far from over, at least in her mind. Over the following weeks, Margot's downfall accelerated with dizzying speed. Asset seizures, criminal indictments, and the inexorable avalanche of public censure stripped away what tattered remnants of status and influence she had once wielded like a blunt instrument. Yet through it all, she remained utterly defiant and unrepentant. "They'll all get what's coming to them, mark my words," she spat at reporters camped outside her palatial estate, now little more than an empty, echoing mausoleum. "This is far from over, you mealy-mouthed vultures." Unfortunately for Margot, her rabid threats and unhinged ravings only further cemented her legacy as a once powerful matriarch, undone by her own boundless avarice and corruption. Society had turned its back on her with a mixture of pity and disdain, leaving her bitter screeds to be consumed by indifferent winds. On the day her sentencing was finally handed down, a staggering array of charges resulting in a harsh multi-year prison term, Margot unleashed a final, unrestrained torrent of malice. "Curse all of you," she howled, thrashing against the iron grip of the bailiffs as they tried to drag her from the courtroom. "Especially you, Alara. This is far from over, you hear me? I'll have my revenge if it's the last thing I—" Whatever final, dire imprecation she intended was cut off as she disappeared through the door, the slam of iron against wood echoing through the court like a grim period. Silence hung heavy for several breathless seconds, and then the hushed murmurs began rippling through the gallery once more. A vile chapter had finally been closed. The damage caused by one woman's unchecked ambition and malice laid horrifyingly bare. As Rowan and I embraced in the wake of that sordid spectacle, I knew our own road towards healing and redemption would be long and arduous. The scars left by Margot's cruelty ran deeper than any inflicted wound. But at least now, At long last, we could begin to rebuild what she had so nearly destroyed. With the poison she had injected into our lives finally excised, there was a chance to nurture something new from the blighted, burned remains of our former existences. Those tender green shoots wouldn't take root overnight, of course. Deep, ravaging fires leave extensive scarring in their wake, but we would tend the ashes dutifully, allowing new life to gradually emerge, hushed and humble at first, then growing stronger and more resilient with each passing season. It was the only way to banish Margot's toxic legacy once and for all, by cultivating the power to persevere where her hatred and corruption could only hope to wither and decay. In the weeks following Margot's sentencing, an eerie silence descended over Winthrop Manor. The echoing halls, once electric with her malicious presence, now felt like a vacuum, the stifling calm before the soft patter of new life begins to take tentative root. Rowan and I moved through those early days in a numb haze, going through the motions of setting the manor to rights, but still emotionally adrift from the cataclysm that had reshaped our lives so violently. We spoke in hushed tones, as if afraid to disturb some lingering malignant force hovering in the shadows. The servants, finally freed of Margot's tyrannical grasp, tiptoed about their duties with the same wary restraint as field mice anticipating the return of a prowling cat. Then, one crisp autumn morning, I awoke to find Rowan sitting at the foot of our bed, his shoulders hunched and head bowed beneath some invisible weight. "Rowan," I murmured, reaching out a hand to his arm. "What's wrong?" For a long moment he didn't respond, simply staring down at his calloused palms as if they belonged to a stranger. Finally, he drew a long, shuddering breath. "I spent so many years letting her gnaw away at my soul, Alara. No matter how vile she became, some part of me could never let go of the fantasy that she actually loved me deep down." Tears welled in his eyes, voice cracking with a lifetime's worth of hurt and disappointment. "She was my mother. I should have protected you from her poisonous lies and cruelty, but I was weak, blinded by delusions of the mother I so desperately wanted her to be." He looked up at me then, anguish etched in the creases of his face. "Can you ever forgive me?" In that moment, I felt my own emotions surge forward like a raging river breaking its banks, not just for the hell Margot had put us through, but for all the lost years we could have spent growing together instead of being warped and diminished by her hatred. I pulled Rowan into a fierce embrace as the dam finally burst, wave after wave of purging sobs racking our bodies in unison. We wept for the wounds that had been inflicted, the scars that would always remain, and the hollow ache of what could have been. But we also wept for the promise of what lay ahead, a new world where Margot's poisonous influence could never again take root. In the days and weeks that followed, we slowly began the work of reclaiming our lives. The manor underwent a top-to-bottom scouring and refurbishment, every last remnant of Margot's corruption purged as if by ritual cleansing. We let go of much of the staff that had enabled her cruelties, opting for a fresh start surrounded by new faces and loyalties. Gone were the dark furnishings, grim draperies, and oppressive decor through which her malice had seeped like a miasma. In their place, we cultivated light, open spaces, and vibrant designs that spoke of rebirth rather than decay. Slowly, tentatively, the scars began to heal into the thick protective calluses of hard-won resilience and perseverance. What gave me the most solace and hope for our future, however, was witnessing Rowan's own metamorphosis. Where once Margot's manipulations had shaped him into a wavering, conflict-averse shell of a man, now I saw an indomitable pillar of resolve and integrity taking form. Gone were the haunted looks and furtive self-doubts. In their place stood a man embracing his role as master of his own destiny, unbowed by the specter of his mother's grievous wrongs. 5 years after Margot's ruination, Winthrop Manor had been virtually rebuilt from the ground up, retrofitted into not just a home, but a nexus for charitable endeavors aimed at empowering those who had once suffered as we had. Battered women's shelters, youth outreach initiatives, counseling programs, all thrived beneath the roof once shadowed by malice and oppression. We dedicated our newfound resources to cultivating the kindness and goodwill Margot had sought so voraciously to extinguish. And though I knew her poisoned roots would never be fully extractable, Watching the fruits of our rebirth blossom with each passing year was the greatest victory I could have hoped to wrest from her clutches. On the eve of the annual charity gala we hosted at the manor, I caught Rowan staring pensively out the window towards the vast sylvan estate grounds, a pensive smile playing across his weathered features. "Do you ever think about her?" he asked without turning to face me. "About your spite for Mother, I mean?" I considered the weight of his question for a long moment before answering. "She doesn't haunt my thoughts much these days," I admitted. Not out of spite or indifference, but rather resolve. Our eyes met then, a deep understanding passing between us. Margot's hatred very nearly destroyed everything, our relationship, our livelihood, our very souls. But we survived. We persevered through the darkness she inflicted and remade something beautiful from the ashes. I laced my fingers through his, marveling at how far we'd come. That is the greatest revenge we could ever claim over her bitterness and cruelty. Not by perpetuating the cycle of hurt, but by overcoming it and choosing to nurture the light she fought so desperately to smother. Hand in hand, we stood in comfortable silence, watching the golden rays of dusk gild the grounds, the lands and legacy we had reclaimed in the name of all that was good, just, and true. Our tomorrow was unwritten, filled with untold promise and possibility. But I knew, without a shred of doubt, that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would meet them as we had every other, overcoming hate with love, healing old wounds, and ensuring even Margot's darkest of legacies could never take permanent root.